Welcome to Leaders in the Arena. My name is Jenny Whitener. I'm the CEO of Bridge Innovate, and it's our pleasure to welcome you joining us today. Bridge Innovate is a global network of business strategists and consultants and designers that team up with you to craft distinctive change for your organization and courageous leadership. This podcast is designed to share valuable insights and lessons from our network to support your leadership journey. Today, our program will be focused on accelerating women to the leadership arena. We're excited to have with us a special guest, Vicki Gordan, and I'll be telling you more about her momentarily. Women in the Workplace 2023 is in a recurring annual survey and report by McKinsey and leanin.org reported a continuing underrepresentation of women, particularly women of color, in corporate leadership ranks. While notable gains have been made in the senior leadership ranks, close to 28% progress at the mid-management level, it's much lower and slower translating in terms of the weak middle for women in leadership pipeline for corporate America. A panel concerned with the great breakup trend uncovered in 2022 survey had continued in 2023, where women at the director level were leaving their companies at higher than historical rates and notably higher than men in that level. As a result of these two dynamics, there are fewer women in the lineup for top positions. For companies intent on harnessing the best talent to lead their companies, these surveys findings create a compelling case for action. Our guest today, Vicki Gordan, is part of the Executive in Residence program here at Bridge Innovate, and is a former senior executive with Fortune 500 financial services company, who we know well. Vicki's held a broad range of senior leadership roles across operational, finance, and staff areas. She also has co-launched and sponsored the Women's Professional Network at this Fortune 500 for over 8 years, which focused on increasing the richness of opportunity for women, including leadership positions. Through her coaching, she remains highly committed to helping leaders maximize their potential and also helping to identify diamonds in the rough to realize the leadership potential for all women. I'm so thrilled to welcome Vicki with us today. Vicki, would you like to introduce yourself a bit more and tell the listeners a bit more about you?
Certainly. Thank you, Jenny. I loved working for the company that I was part of. It was just an amazing experience, and I had tremendous opportunities. And I think probably at the top of that list was the subject of what we're going to talk about today, the Women's Professional Network. It filled my cup, and it just was so energizing and just so powerful. So I'm thrilled to have a chance to talk with you about it today.
Good. Well, let's start the conversation because I think this is critically important all around. When you think about starting the conversation at the senior level on equity at the leadership level, especially for women, how do you go about that?
Well, I think there's tons of ways you can do it. So I'll just give you a sense of how we started it. It really started with some conversations with one of my mentees, who then turned into just an amazing colleague and ultimately a co-sponsor in this work with me. And I think those conversations, were rooted in our passions and to a little bit our frustrations. We had noticed, what we called the leaky pipeline, as women advance through the leadership ranks. And we've been hearing from our mentees some discouragement around ambiguous feedback that they were getting. We also saw that oftentimes men seem to advance to the senior leadership ranks by being promoted from within, but often women were recruited from the outside. So we decided that we were going to do something about it. We decided to do some research first. We wanted to approach this from a facts, data, logic standpoint. Right. And we created a white paper that really identified issues, opportunities, made some recommendations, and we socialized that white paper with a lot of our trusted sort of colleagues, senior leaders. And then we made some refinements and we presented it to the senior team, the C-suite. They liked it. They thought it was good, but there was a lag actually advancing some of the recommendations that we made. So we just independently convened a small pilot group of women to take on a couple of the recommendations. We did that knowing it was a risk, but we thought it was a risk worth taking. And ultimately that work was very powerful, and it was sanctioned, and it evolved into the Women's Professional Network. I think it's worth noting, though, that while we called it the Women's Professional Network, the group was not limited to women. There were men that were part of this group, and a significant part. And it was really important that they were, because we need men as allies in this work. We need them to be, joined at the hip in terms of its importance. So that was important. And I think, while our mission really focused on, increasing the richness of opportunities for women, as you just mentioned, the end game for our work was much broader, and it was really intended to benefit employees in our company broadly. And so, at the end of our mission was ultimately creating an inclusive culture of empowerment, fairness, and opportunity for all. So it was, we had a mission and a purpose, but we also wanted to impact everyone.
Right. And how inspiring, right? When you think about this, what you said, that, the mission, the purpose for the group was ultimately creating an inclusive culture of empowerment, fairness, and opportunity for all. That's very invigorating. That's exciting. And I really love the fact that in terms of starting this conversation at the executive level, you started with that fact-based, research-based focus. You said, let's get our data together. And then from there, starting small, like just beginning, just
Absolutely.
starting. I think oftentimes we think about things, but just starting small, learning, evolving to then craft this mission. What do you see with the trends today for women that may be inhibiting their growth at the senior level position, senior leader level position? I have to say that 3 times.
It's not that easy. So I would tell you there's a ton of things, unfortunately, that we do that, make us sometimes our own worst enemies, but, and things that inhibit our growth. Some of those are, I think, germane to women, but, some of them are systemic, some of them are organizational, and I could talk really probably for hours about all of this, but I'll just focus on a few that I think really are germane to women. I think the first one that I would mention is the belief that if I do great work, I'll be rewarded. And there's no question you have to do great work, right? But women don't tell their story. They just have a faith that something will happen. And so that's an inhibitor. And we'll hopefully talk a little bit more about that. The other thing, another thing that I saw women often doing is not applying for something unless they check all the boxes. And, men will very frequently apply for something if they check 40 to 50% of the boxes. But women think they have to hit every single thing. We often use language that doesn't really align with the way that men speak. And when men are in leadership positions, that can create this communication gap. Women tend to be relational thinkers, and men are much more direct. We tend to be divergent thinkers, and men are convergent thinkers. So, when we're talking about all the things that could impact the situation, they just want to know, they want to get to the point, right? So that can be an inhibitor. We use limiters often. I found myself doing this, words like kind of, perhaps, might be. We also use self-deprecating language. I can't tell you, I know I did it myself, but I've heard women, well, I know I've only been in the department for a couple of months, but have we thought about maybe doing, it's full of limiters and self-deprecation. Imposter syndrome is a huge one. It's that belief that, boy, I know they're going to figure out at some point that I'm not as good as they think they think I am. And there's a lot of things that come into play, I think, here. Women undersell their capabilities. Frequently, we don't want to be seen as bragging. We often lack self-belief. And we have, I think, very active self-critical voices. Women, a lot of them are really driven to perfection, and that can in itself be an inhibitor. But when we fall short, we are extremely hard on ourselves, and that can be an inhibitor to moving along. I think women are sometimes reluctant to confront when confrontation is warranted. We've been taught to be nice girls, be good girls, and definitely don't be the what word. women, I saw this just today and with someone I was mentoring, put their job before their career. And that's important to do your job, but putting your job always before your career is something that can hold you back. And the way it shows up sometimes is women will say, I have so much left to accomplish in this role. It's just not the right time for me to go for that yet. I'm not ready yet. So they put their job before their career. Women also, I think, don't understand often the real value of sponsors. They're always focused on mentoring. They don't understand the value of sponsors and knowing who's in the room for the job that they want, who's going to make those decisions. So that's another thing. I think that's important. I have counseled so many women who have said that they really would love to go for a leadership role, but they're as a caregiver, whether that's a parent or for elderly, for their children or for elderly parents, they just don't think that they would have that time to devote to that next level. And my first retort often is, do you really think your boss works that much harder than you? And of course, when, say it like that, it's like, well, and I said, I've seen emails from you at 7 at night. I've seen emails from you at 7 in the morning, and so do you really think your boss works harder? So that's another place I think that they can inhibit themselves. And then, smaller things, but still, I think, meaningful, taking on support roles, being the note taker all the time, being the facilitator, not being seen as the thought leader, not being seen as the contributor, but the person who is the helper instead. So those are just a few of them. I could go on.
I know. I was going to say, this is a huge workshop. I can see this workshop evolving, where we could really dig in more deeply into each of these areas, because I think you are so spot on about many of the personas or the attributes that women, not all women, but many women tend to take on some form of these that may be inhibiting their ability to move into that leadership level. I always have told stories, even in the leadership development work that I do, about the importance of seeing yourself in that power, with that power broker behind you, or as a part of your persona, to be able to talk about the fact that men so often deal with power things in their life, like blowers and big trucks and things that are powerful.
That's
And
true.
their personas are so natural that they orchestrate and execute around these very forceful things. And typically in the nurturing role, there's more of a genteel, more or less, spirit that comes into a lot of that. And again, I'm generalizing, it's not the case for all women, but I think we have to stand up and bring forth that assertiveness,
Mhm.
to bring forth that confidence,
Mhm.
and that's earned based on our competence ourselves and the perspectives we bring to the marketplace. So I love the discussion about it, and I think there are many things that we can do as women to be
Awesome.
stronger advocates for ourselves and to continue on. So let's talk about that a little bit more. You helped us to understand what women, how they may be seeing themselves that might be holding them back. But let's talk about, like, looking at it from an organizational level.
Mhm.
How do you orchestrate at the organizational level change
Mhm.
that really positions or supports the advancement of women in leadership roles? How do you do that?
So, in essence, sort of how did we approach this work, really, I think is what you're asking. And I would say that we did a couple of things that I think were really critical, and they involved the structure of the way we built this network and also the programming focus. So I could probably kind of interweave those as I go along. And I would tell you that from the very beginning, my co-sponsor, that colleague that I mentioned in the very beginning, we knew we could not do this alone. So we recruited co-leaders. And that co-leadership group grew as our geographical scope grew to encompass all of our home offices and our field offices and everything else. Those co-leads were responsible really to lead the entire slate of programming that we were going to develop. And that includes from strategy to planning to execution, design, evaluation, metrics, the whole 9 yards. We sat down with them in the very beginning because we wanted to be purpose driven, and we developed our mission that I spoke of. And then we we thought of what our priorities would be, and we had four. And we aligned all our programming against those priorities, and we called them the 4 Cs. So they were culture, career, community, and commerce. So the first one, culture, we wanted to create a culture of inclusion at every level of the organization. Career, we wanted to recruit, develop, and retain competitive talent. So we wanted our programs to make that happen, to help that happen. Community, we didn't want to be just focused on us as a company. We wanted to make a difference in our communities and to also learn from our communities, frankly, because we have a lot of diverse organizations in our communities that we can learn from. And so we wanted to leverage those community partnerships of diverse charitable organizations. The last one's really critical, though. That was commerce. And so we knew that we had to make a tie to the business. So we wanted to be able to, do things like contract with diverse businesses and create products for, broader customer bases. So all in all, we had about 12 to 15 programs running at any given time. And the co-leads that I spoke of, they were each responsible for a group of those programs. So they broadly solicited and recruited volunteers. So all of us were volunteers. We were not paid for this. It was not our day job. This was a volunteer effort. So they recruited volunteers to help design and deliver each of those programs. And each of those teams had leadership. So if you think about it, you had project teams with leaders and contributors, then you had WPN leads, and then you had co-sponsors. It was really like running a small company, and I loved it. I mean, I absolutely loved it. I loved running this organization, a small company of about 1,200 plus employees, because there were about 1,200 members. And
Wow.
when I reflect on it, the thing that was beautiful about this approach was we were very mission driven. We wanted to deliver great game-changing content. And we did that through those programs, those 12 to 15 programs, to a very wide swath of employees, not just women. And they benefited, from national level speakers to networking opportunities, mentoring, all kinds of things. But on top of that, because of the structure, we had benefits that we hadn't even thought about in the beginning. And that was the program leads and the WPN leads and the contributors. They all gained hugely valuable hands-on leadership experience by doing this work, by leading teams, by interacting with senior leadership, by developing a much broader network of folks, and also seeing talent from other areas. The people on these teams were from all over the company. And so they also, gained some, I think, great experience delivering results, and also got a ton of coaching. So as sponsors, we coached everybody up and down the line, but the WPN leads, they were responsible for the project leads underneath them and those teams to make sure they stayed on track. So that was, I think, hugely powerful in terms of our, of the way we went about this work. So we were not only able to I think fulfill the mission that we wanted, which was deliver great change and good learning, et cetera, to a broad swath of employees. But through the way we did it, program teams benefited as well, just from those real life leadership experiences.
Right. I mean, well, first of all, hearing that story, the first thing I want to say is, woohoo! Congratulations. That was pretty amazing. You think about it, those all driven through volunteerism, and to have 1,200 individuals engaged in sort of elevating equity and elevating women at a leadership level. What commitment. I love the fact that you created structure for the different volunteer roles. You could tell that your description, the level of commitment, and I think passion and purpose that you connected to really bring the initiative forward. So often I think organizations today try like crazy to launch something and 3 people show up, like what a testament
Yeah.
to you guys. And I love the 4 C's. But in fact, and I know this is somewhere else in the notes because you and I were talking about today, but it really probably is 5 C's, because what you guys just demonstrated and what you were encouraging was also the element of courage. And so if you were to think about culture, career, community, commerce, and courage, that might not have been a 5th C, but you are certainly demonstrating it And your leaders of the Professional Women Network were demonstrating it so well. So that sounds like a fantastic story.
Well, thank you. It was a lot of fun. I mean, the courage piece, I remember, one of the president of our largest company at the time, he ended up as our COO. He, at one point when we were doing the hackathon that we'll talk about, he said, "So how did this all come about?" All he knew was these two leads were leading it. And he spoke to the entire group of folks that was there. And ultimately it came back to my partner and I, and he said something. He said, no one asked them to do this. He said they saw a need and they did something. And he said, that is something that every one of you in this room can do. I want to hear from you if you have ideas. I mean, it was a great sort of way to sort of turn that learning around for everyone. So,
and I think it just tells us organizationally where you're trying to bring equity and fairness to the advancement of women, or whatever your purpose is, if you get alignment around a very strong purpose, give people a little bit of organizational structure that where they can push their passion and their commitment towards that purpose, how much can be done to create change in an organization. But I know that you guys talked a lot about your programming. So can you give us some more examples of the programming that you guys had? Because it seems like that was distinctive about your success.
It was. So there's 3 programs I'd like to just highlight out of the 12 or 15 that we had going at any time. The first one's the authenticity program. And this was a huge leap of faith for me. It was the brainchild of a fellow leader who really believed in the importance of authentic leadership for women. She ended up developing a 6-week course, which we delivered over 12 weeks so that there was a break for each of these women. Cohorts of 20 to 25 people at a time. She was a hands-on leader, and ultimately then she trained the trainers, and we were able to do it across sites. The key tenets of that program were things like self-confidence and self-worth, courageous conversations, being in the arena, which is so critical. The quality of your actions drive the outcomes you either want or you don't want, which is I think, a very telling statement. And bold leadership, leading in the face of disagreement. So that program was largely focused on individual contributor women, people who are starting into the pipeline, as well as sort of lower level leaders. And it was hugely successful. Metrics from that program, because we did metrics for everything we did. They showed that both the employees who participated and their managers, reported dramatic increases in confidence, presence, results, and leadership contributions. So that's one of them. The second one I'd like to just bring to your attention is sponsorship. So we had developed a mentoring program, and it would run for 6 months at a time. And we had 200 women matched with mentors, each of those 6-month cohorts. But we knew that, mentoring's important, and it's very, it's a great tool to build skills, et cetera, that if we wanted to really move the dial on leadership, we needed to crack the nut on sponsorship. And, sponsorship has been fairly elusive for some women. So we knew that to develop sponsors, would help women be seen and taken seriously for that next role. So we developed a 1-year pilot. And we had business areas that we went to. They nominated promising, high potential women from their areas for whom promotions had been elusive. There were 16 of them. We paired them with senior leader sponsors, and we created a huge curriculum. It was a major, major effort. We gave training to and set expectations for those sponsors. I mean, this is not mentoring. This is different. And we did skills training as well for the folks. We brought in outside speakers. We did a ton of different things. We created a feedback process. We created networking opportunities. So it was a very intensive kind of program, and it was hugely successful. Within 6 months of their completing the program, 10 out of the 16 had already gotten promoted, and all of them have been promoted since. So that was one of those, oh my gosh, we really moved the dial.
This is working. This is working.
Yeah, it was a great moment, when we saw that happen. The last thing I was kind of alluding to a moment ago, and that was the hackathon. And I mean, I could talk about all of those programs, but this one was, I think, really important because it was the cement to the business in a way that they could truly feel and see it. I think when we talk about D&I and we talk about representation, et cetera, it's almost a truism. It's the right thing to do, right? But the beauty to me of it is it makes strong business sense. And there's numerous McKinsey studies on this, but the most recent one surveyed, 1,000 companies in 15 countries. So this is not just one area. It's not the US. It's broad business. And they found that the top 25%, so the top quartile of D&I companies in that pool were 25% more likely to have above average profitability. So just think about that, 25% more likely to have above average profitability than those companies in the lowest quartile. So there's a compelling sort of case at that point that really bringing diverse voices, bringing women's voices to the table can make a difference on profit, business results. So we knew that in order for our efforts to ultimately take hold and to be really embedded in the organization, we needed to ensure that we were driving business results. In other words, we're connecting to that commerce priority that we talked about. So we piloted a hackathon. We had it project managed by women from the WPN, and we worked with a business area to identify a business challenge. We brought together about 40 people from broadly across the company, from the field, from the home offices. They were diverse by age, race, gender, job level, parents, non-parents, gender orientation, you name it. We tried to hit a lot of different attributes. We wanted different voices at the table. And so we provided background reading and some education on the business challenge. And then we brought them into the company, and then we split them into teams, and they had 24 hours to develop product solution and implementation recommendations. And then they had to choose one of all of the ones they developed and present it to management. And so they had to create a presentation as well. We brought together an executive panel, the president of the largest business subsidiary that we had, the P&L lead for that business, who was an SVP, and the finance lead, who was a VP. And they were judges for those ideas. And it was hugely, hugely successful. And it benefited the participants, and it benefited the company too, but I'll talk about the participants first. They gained a much wider network of folks by being involved in this program. They got visibility to senior leaders. They gained experience presenting to senior leaders, and they really gained a much greater understanding of why D&I was important to our business and why it was important to business results. Now, on the other hand, the benefits to the company were really great as well. We generated more than 100 product development ideas in that session, and nearly all of them ended up in the product development pipeline and were implemented the following year. So we really did bring a lot of different voices to the table to get, I think, a great result for the business.
It's interesting. I know you said that there were, 12 to 15, 16 different programs going on, but the fact that you identified these three, it's very interesting because when you think of what would be most critical for the advancement of an individual, at the leadership level, this focus that you had on authentic leadership, first and foremost, right? So how do you exemplify those aspects of really great authentic leadership? You had that covered. You had this component of sponsorship, where it's like, if we want to go fast, we go alone. If we want to go far, we go together, right? So the famous quote there.
Mm-hmm.
And you built that mentorship in a very structured and informed way around sponsorship. And then this hackathon, like when we think about the advanced leadership level, whether you're male, female, or what, no matter your role, gender, nationality, at the leadership level, you are about anticipating, identifying, and seeking the next generation of the company. Like, where are we headed? What will be next? How will we continue to thrive and grow? And I think building those hackathon skill sets really put them in their arena. If they didn't have that opportunity in their day job, they had that opportunity to be in that arena in the hackathon. And so how exciting. And then the benefit for the company, right? Like you said, to like deliver this portfolio. I mean, this is great. Vicki, we're talking again about this. Don't worry. This is going to continue on. So I know, big program, the Professional Women's Network, great success that you guys spawned it from its origin, had great success. Tell us a little bit about the lesson learned. Because if our listeners are trying to say, how do I do this in my company? Or what's important for, creating programs to advance women or to advance equity at the broader level, tell us about the lessons learned.
So, there were some, I think, broad lessons that were learned. And then there were lessons, I think, that were really learned by the participants, or learned, that the participants really gained from this experience. So, I would tell you that, while we had as our original intent to benefit women and to advance women, we were so much broader than that. And we had an impact on tremendously diverse attributes of our employees, across race, across gender, et cetera. And so that was really powerful. And I think that definitely brought folks together. It definitely created an more inclusive company. We saw that, things that people thought of as traditionally women's issues, women's programs, were really employee programs, right? Work-life balance is not a women's issue. Work-life balance is an employee issue. Parental leave, not maternity leave, but parental leave is something that men care about as fathers as much as women care about as mothers. And so, there was this, I think, a broadening of people's thinking around what was a woman's issue and what was just an employee issue. I would tell you that not all of the lessons were positive as well. And I do want to leave a little bit of time for the lessons, I think, from the participant standpoint. But one lesson in particular that I would say my co-sponsor and I struggled with was this delicate balance of trying to act with a sense of urgency. We didn't do this just to, have a lark. We wanted things to happen. But we also needed to take into account, and at times it was hard, the ability of the organization, the ability of leaders and employees to really absorb change. So there's this constant tension, right? And I think at times we were better at that than others. And that's just something I would caution anyone, because you do tend to work from passion. And so you do want things to happen, but you have to be willing to nudge, but not steamroll, I guess is the best way to put it. The things that I think about as the lessons for women, and I thought about it that way as I was stepping down as co-sponsor, after 8 years, and there were 8 lessons. But as I reflected on it, they are not lessons just for women. They are lessons for everyone. And so I want to make sure that it comes through that way. And the first one really, I think, we exemplified by just doing this work, which is to channel your passions and your frustrations into action, and then to engage others in that process as partners. If you sit on the sidelines, nothing's going to get done. And so, you have to take action, but it takes courage to take action. And so if you engage a partner, you can keep each other in the game. You can keep each other resilient. And there were times where we each had to do that for each other. And it can make all the difference in terms of staying in it. The second lesson, I think that we tried to impart and that we learned ourselves is to run hard. You have to run hard if you want to get far, but you also have to remain very connected to your priorities. And women in particular, I think they try to do it all and then some. And, we have to be really careful to pick the most important places where we can spend our energies and things that are going to make a difference. We tend to want to do it all right. And,
Right.
and I think it's just the priority setting is important. Taking smart risks. The authenticity program was, I think, a great example of that. When it first got pitched to me, I was like, oh my gosh, warning bells, bing, bing, bing. It just went off. And, I could think of, oh my gosh, it's not a sanctioned training program. It's going to cost, it's going to cost some money, blah, blah, blah. But I did have trust in that leader, and I saw the brilliance of her idea. So I advocated for it. I went to HR, I got some money, And we took a leap of faith on that one, but we made it a smart risk by piloting it. And it was a true game changer. I sometimes, if I want to feel good, I go back and I read some of the testimonials that we got out of that program, and it just it just fills your heart. So
Yeah.
it was really one of our most successful programs. Being authentic and being in the arena is something that came out of that authenticity program, but that is something I find is really important. It's a huge lesson. And it's actually a conundrum for a lot of folks, especially introverts. And I count myself as an introvert. So, the thinking is, if I'm quiet and shy, then, I mean, how can I put myself out there? I mean, those are just two opposite things, right? And the women in this program learned that they could be both. They could do both. It took intention, it took being fearless in conversations, and it took a belief that they were someone worth listening to. But you can be that, you need to be authentic and you need to be in the arena. Telling your own story is lesson 5. And, as I mentioned earlier, most women believe if I build it, they will come. That's like a Field of Dreams thing from an old movie. In other words, if I do great work, I will get rewarded. It will take time, but I will be rewarded. And I would tell you that, yes, absolutely, you have to do good work, but that's only part of the story. It is not going to happen on its own. And so you do have to build it. You do have to do good work. But if no one knows you built it and no one knows it's worth coming to, no one is going to come. I mean, there's not going to be a reward. And a senior leader kind of laid this out for me better than anybody else. At one point, when they gave me some advice, I was known as one of those people who had tons of projects going on, and I would find more things. I was just constantly trying to make things better. And he looked at me and he goes, Vicki, it doesn't matter how much you do. What matters is whether anyone knows and anyone cares. And that was prophetic in so many ways. And when we talked to, the folks that we worked with, we said, no one knows your story better than you. So you need to be your own best advocate. You need to tell your story to people who matter. And then you need to back it up with stellar work. So the work's still important.
Well, and telling your own story, the behavior or the competency behind that is being able to articulate something in a way that moves people, right? And inspires people. And that fundamental competency is what's needed at the leadership level, whether you're telling a story about your work, your personal work, or you're telling a story about your team's work,
Right.
about the success of your organization, the
Absolutely.
success of your division. Can you tell that in a compelling and confident way? And so
Absolutely.
some aspect of that just hits multifaceted. Me, my team, my organization, can I express myself in a confident and inspiring way? And I think that's fundamental.
Yeah.
What else? What were some of the
So
others?
just a few more. So the 6th lesson, you need to know who's in the room and you need to know how they describe you. And so this is a lesson I learned from a woman named Carla Harris, who was one of the best speakers I think we ever had at the company. She said, you need to identify where you want to go, and then you need to know who makes the decisions on those jobs and what are the 3 adjectives, what are the 3 attributes they would say describe the ideal candidate. And then you need to know, how would they describe you? So if they can't describe you, then you got some work to do. You have got to build some relationships, right? And you need to tell your story. But if they describe you differently than those 3 attributes, or if they describe you differently even than the way you see yourself, then you have to listen and listen hard and seek to understand. Because at the end of the day, their perception is their reality. And so, that knowledge, though, is powerful. You use that knowledge to show up with those leaders in ways that change those perceptions. You use the words, you demonstrate the actions that show that you are, in fact, those 3 attributes. And she actually told a great story about that.
Yeah.
She was considered not tough enough. And every time she saw these people, she would talk about a tough thing she just finished. So
Yeah.
it was a great example.
I mean,
Um,
that story about knowing who's in the room and knowing the attributes, or kind of like anticipating, right? It makes me think about, coming at something from a position of strength and
mhm,
knowledge, right?
right.
So I always just said, not many people are able to get the next job by whining. It's from this position of knowledge
Right.
and perspective and strength. And what you just described says, do your homework.
Right. Do the homework, and don't rely on your manager if your manager is not going to be in the room. You've got to be seen and be heard and be understood by those who are going to make those decisions.
Good
So,
point.
we've talked a little bit about this with the sponsorship program, but I think a critical lesson for us was, mentors are important. They teach you new skills and approaches, but sponsors are powerful. They change your career trajectory, or they can, and they can really stem that leaky pipeline for women. But you need to know who your advocates are. And if you don't have them, you need to get them. You need to enlist them. You can't just have them, but you have to use them, right? I mean, they have to be present. And this, I think, was critical. And this was a huge learning for me on a personal level. You have to understand how well perceived they are. Because, an advocate who is not highly respected at the senior leadership ranks is not going to do as much good for you as someone who is, right? So you have to make sure you have people in your corner that are going to be heard, right? And that are willing to make a difference. So that idea of your allies and your sponsors, your advocates, is really critical. And then the last one, I think, is an absolute must. It's never sell yourself short. I can't tell you how many times I did that. I mean, if I had $1 for every time I did it, I would be a rich person. But
Wouldn't we all? Wouldn't we all?
women too often fall, victim to the imposter syndrome, and I still do. And it's pathetic, but it happens. It's kind of ingrained. There are a million things where we say, we're just not quite as good as we need to be or want to be, at least in our own eyes. And what I say to women is, when that happens, you need to listen to others, and you need to hear how others see you, because those allies can see belief in you. I mean, that's so important. It's so powerful. If you're hearing good things consistently, then you need to believe it. You need to own it, and then you need to do good things with it. And then you need to pay it forward for others. So, we often hold ourselves up to this awful standard, just an incredible standard, when in fact, others see us as very powerful and very, very high contributors and things like that. And so we just need to listen to those folks and realize that they're smart people too, and they wouldn't be saying this if they didn't believe it. So we need to own it. So those are the things that I think were the lessons that we took away from this work. Jenny, I think you're on mute.
I was going to say, absolutely amazing. And thank you so much. What an extraordinary story about the Women's Professional Network, launched at a Fortune 500, and the amazing results that you had. And I just want to go back to the mission that you launched with that group, creating an inclusive culture of empowerment, fairness, and opportunity for all. Thank you, Vicki, for all you've done for women and for others, all leaders at all levels, to advance themselves. Thanks for the words of wisdom today. And I know that we'll do more about continuing this conversation. So we're going to be having you back. Thanks so much, Vicki. Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.